Hello and welcome back to TriggerSmart. I want to start off really quick by saying that there is a Discord server that's available to members of Patreon and YouTube. And also, I've heard from a lot of you that you are either getting unsubscribed or you're not getting notifications of videos. And this does happen to certain channels at certain times, depending on how the social media platform feels about them and the content they've been putting out. So make sure, first of all, that you are subscribed if you want to be, and then make sure that your bell notification is on so you actually receive notifications when I go live and new videos come out. But for the topic today, this is going to be a quick video, but it's a very important video. So 501(c)(3)s are not allowed to get involved in politics, especially in the church. And there's kind of some wiggle room there because a lot of churches do talk about politics, but they're not allowed to necessarily push a specific candidate or do like political preaching. They're not legally allowed to keep 501(c) tax exempt status if they are doing political campaigns, basically. Let's look at this here really quick. I said, can a 501(c) church preach politics in the church? No, a 501(c) church cannot generally endorse or oppose political candidates without risking its tax-exempt status under the Johnson Amendment, which has prohibited such political campaign intervention since 1954. This includes making verbal or written statements on behalf of the organization favoring or opposing candidates for public office. That could lead to revocation of tax-exempt status or excise taxes. Churches, like other 501(c)(3) organizations, must avoid direct or indirect participation in political campaigns. However, churches can engage in certain nonpartisan political activities. They can discuss social or political issues from a religious perspective. As long as it doesn't amount to endorsing candidates, they can conduct voter education forums, publish nonpartisan voter guides, or running get-out-of-the-vote drives, provided they remain unbiased and don't favor any candidate or party. And they can do limited lobbying or legislation on ballot measures, though it must not be a substantial part of the organization's activities. A recent development adds nuance. In 2025, as part of the proposed settlement and lawsuit, National Religious Broadcasters versus Long, the IRS stated that houses of worship may discuss political candidates and elections during religious services, such as assessing a candidate's character through the lens of religious faith without it counting as prohibited campaign intervention. This position aligns with limited enforcement history and a 2017 executive order, but is technically binding only on the plaintiffs in this case and applies specifically to communications tied to religious services. It is controversial. Over 1,500 nonprofits, including groups like Americans United for Separation of Church and State and National Council of Nonprofits, argue that it could erode the Johnson Amendment, turning tax-exempt churches into channels for partisan politics and anonymous election spending. Critics warn it might encourage dark money, and it could flow and challenge the separation of church and state, even if the settlement doesn't broadly rewrite the law. So overall, while some political preaching on issues is permissible, endorsing candidates remains restricted and risky. Churches should consult legal experts or IRS guidance for their specific situation, as enforcement can depend on the facts and the circumstances. So again, there's some wiggle room, right? Ministry Watch, based on some quick research, looks like it's legitimate in these matters, right? Sort of 501(c)(3) organizations and churches. So this one says, Turning Point Faith ups political pressure on America's pastors. They talk about Charlie Kirk when he was 18, founding Turning Point USA with a $10,000 donation. It says how it's matured into a $55 million, 450 employee organization that promotes small government, capitalism, vaccine skepticism, and claims of election fraud to millions of high school and college students and a growing number of adults. And remember that Tyler Boyer was hit with election fraud and he was pardoned by President Trump. It says they have lots of different programs for different people. In June, 400 pastors and wives attended TPUSA's first annual pastor summit in San Diego. Kirk told the group, the point wasn't Christian theology, which divides. If we focus on that, he said, we're going to be having these debates in prison because America's historic liberties are disappearing by the hour. Kirk said the greatest impact could happen in the faith space by changing the country's churches in order to change the country. It was a no-brainer to recreate TPUSA's model for the faith community, says spokesperson Andrew Colvett. He says there are three types of churches in America today: the courageous, the cowardly, and the complicit. And this final category is growing fast. We want to encourage the courageous, win over and inspire the cowardly, and call out the complicit. If the church goes woke, we are truly lost in this country. Kirk said the church's priority is to win souls, but freedom to do so wouldn't last if churches don't grow a spine. Kirk has said that the church is one institution in America that the radical left doesn't control and is the last firewall to freedom. Now, this is where it starts getting interesting. TPUSA's faith co-chair is Pastor Rob McCoy. He leads Godspeak Calvary Chapel out in California. McCoy attended Mennonite Brethren Biblical Seminary. Mennonites generally eschew politics, but he is now creating a series of lectures that will be used to train congregations across the country to turn churches into centers of political activism. Now, political campaigns, as we read before, is a no-no for 501c3. You'll lose your tax-exempt status. I don't know if this borders on that, right? Political activism. Kirk told summit attendees that Liberty Counsel, a nonprofit legal group, stands ready to defend them if the IRS investigates their political speech. It would seem that Kirk and McCoy were planning to use their church and their reach to affect politics and do political activism, and clearly that worked for them in getting President Trump elected. Now, does that tap dance on the edge of political campaigns? And how far are they going to go with that? Kirk clearly told them that Liberty Counsel, a legal group, would defend them if the IRS investigates their political speech. So it seems as though he gave the green light for people to use their church to preach politics and activism and possibly campaigns. We don't know yet, which is fine. They can do that, but they can't do that and maintain 501c3 status. A page of faith resources includes a faith activism grant form that allows churches to request funding for the political events they coordinate with TPUSA Faith. TPUSA is a 501c3, meaning its work must be nonpartisan, and its Form 990 says its mission includes nonpartisan debate, dialogue, and discussion. Spokesman Andrew Colvett said he was not aware of any Democrat officials ever speaking at TPUSA events, but the organization has made good faith efforts to invite many, including President Joe Biden, who doesn't get out much. TPUSA Action is a 501c4, which endorses political candidates as allowed by IRS regulations, so long as political activity is not its primary function. And you have Turning Point PAC, an advocacy group launched in May. TPUSA Action hosted Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida at rallies supporting GOP candidates J.D. Vance in Ohio, Doug Mastriano in Pennsylvania, and incumbent Senator Ron Johnson in Wisconsin. TPUSA Action and Turning Point PAC are currently under scrutiny by the Arizona Secretary of State's office following a partisan rally held just before Arizona's primary elections that appeared to violate campaign finance laws. And the Federal Elections Commission has received a complaint about the group's failure to identify donors as required by law. Kirk is a personal friend of Donald Trump Jr. and introduced him to TPUSA's college audiences. He took a sabbatical to serve as chair of Students for Trump and pledged to send 80-plus busloads of patriots to D.C. to fight for the president in D.C. on January 6, 2021. Spokesman Andrew Colvett said TPUSA wound up sending a smaller number of buses and that students left after Trump's speech and did not participate in the chaos of the Capitol attack. Kirk also teamed with Jerry Falwell Jr. to found the Falkirk Center for Faith and Liberty at Liberty University in 2019, but as we know, Falwell left under a cloud of scandal in 2020, and Kirk announced the launch of TPUSA Faith soon after Liberty declined to renew his contract in 2021. Both founders' names have been scrubbed, and the center, a target of Liberty student protests, is known as Standing for Freedom Center. What's the big takeaway? Well, it appears that Kirk and McCoy, and possibly others, according to this and what they said, it appears that they are trying to use the church for political activism and possibly campaigns. And that goes against 501c3. If they want to remain 501c3 status, then they cannot get into politics the way they're wanting to. And clearly, if Charlie Kirk is saying that he's setting up legal means for these pastors in these churches up front, he probably knows that he was doing something that went against the 501c3 status and tax exemption. I find that very interesting. I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments. Do you think that TPUSA Faith has ulterior motives around politics? As always, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. I appreciate all you members, and thanks to the mods for helping out with the live streams. And if you want to support the channel, there are links down in the description. And of course, you can become a member on YouTube or also go over to my Patreon. And I'll see you on the next one.